The Holy Gospel according to Mark, the 9th chapter.
Glory to you, O Lord.
6 days later, Jesus took with him Peter and James and John, and led them up a high mountain apart by themselves. And he was transfigured before them, and his clothes became dazzling white, such as no one on earth could bleach them. And there appeared to them Elijah with Moses, who were talking with Jesus. Then Peter said to Jesus, "Rabbi, it is good for us to be here. Let us make 3 dwellings, one for you, one for Moses, and one for Elijah." He did not know what to say, for they were terrified. Then a cloud overshadowed them, and from the cloud there came a voice, "This is my Son, the Beloved. Listen to him." Suddenly, when they looked around, they saw no one with them anymore, but only Jesus. As they were coming down the mountain, he ordered them to tell no one about what they had seen until after the Son of Man had risen from the dead. The Gospel of the Lord.
Praise to you, O Christ.
Well, I'm sure I'm not the only one here who's been a fan of Jeff Foxworthy, right? Okay. I remember one of his jokes that celebrated the virtue of your neck being red, at least I think this was one of his, was that if your idea of an evening of entertainment including watching a bug zapper in your backyard, well, I think you know the rest. So let's be honest here. Who does this pertain to? How many of you have spent the evening watching a bug zapper in your backyard? Okay, all right. That's what I thought. But I'll be honest, I can't say that I've never smiled or laughed a little when I've watched one of those little fiery explosions of bugs landing on one of those blue neon lights. It's a bit amusing to think that just that little bit of light can draw a dumb old bug to its entertaining demise. That is, until you open your front door at night and the next thing you know, there's all kinds of bugs flying around your living room lamps, or that you have to pretty regularly clean out those ceiling globes and your ceiling lights from all the dead bugs that have collected there throughout the year. So maybe those bug zappers bring so much joy because we feel that it's payback for all the annoyance they cause us by being drawn to the light. But we certainly aren't too much different from bugs in that sense. Light definitely draws us in, just like bugs to a bug zapper. That's why any major concert you would go to has a big, expensive light show on stage that accompanies the main performance. It's why fireworks are so popular and they draw huge crowds for their celebrations. That's why businesses invest in those bright blue and red open signs that light up and flash to bring people in off the streets. We've even had to invent the word rubbernecking because of what happens when we see emergency vehicle lights on the side of the road. And how many of you have tried those whitening strips on your teeth to make your teeth brighter? I mean, we are drawn to the light, which might be why God uses such brilliant light to draw us to Jesus. Maybe you've noticed in the Gospel of Mark that we get this idea that is called the messianic secret. This concept where Jesus is being so secretive about who he really is. When Jesus casts out demons, he doesn't permit them to speak because he says, "They know who I am." When Jesus heals people, he pleads with them not to tell anybody what happened or who did it, but they rarely listen. When Jesus was baptized at the beginning of his ministry, Mark's gospel tells us that only Jesus saw the dove descend and heard God's voice, keeping even that a secret from everyone who was in attendance that day. Even in today's story of the Transfiguration, as those disciples came down the mountain, Jesus ordered them, who had just witnessed this powerful thing, not to tell anyone until they've seen the Son of Man rise from the dead. Yet in the midst of all this secretiveness, Jesus becomes anything but inconspicuous. I mean, his clothes become dazzling white, even whiter than any of the clothes that some of you guys may have mistakenly put bleach on in the laundry machine. And the light radiates from him. Those two ancient prophets, whom the Jewish people had assumed rose to heaven, appear in the company of Jesus. And if that wasn't enough, God's voice returns, this time for everyone who's present to hear. So now the cat's out of the bag. And while Jesus does try and remain concealed for a bit longer, we realize that those aren't his ultimate plans. His plans are to be conspicuous. This light show that occurs brings a sense of disclosure. Not necessarily disclosing the secrets of the universe or the meaning of life or anything that we would hope along those lines, but instead his plans include disclosing himself. We have this opportunity to witness for ourselves what the God who has become incarnate has come to do. What we plan to do with this disclosed information, well, that's the difficult part, and the major question that each of us has to answer for ourselves. Because I believe that we all desire our own transfiguration. We have a need for transformation in our lives. It seems that rarely do we have a sense that everything is all right, whether it's with ourselves or with the world or with each other. There's always a need for healing. There's always a need for self-improvement. There's always a need for self-advancement. And then we look around the world and we wonder what in the world is going on. Poverty and hunger and violence and hatred and war and greed, and the list that goes on and on and on. And then we look at each other and we see broken relationships. We see people who aren't doing what we believe to be right. And jealousy towards those who we think have it all together, and prejudice against those who don't have it all together. Where is the transfiguration when we need it? That must have been such an amazing sight to see on the mountaintop that day. Seeing something that once was normal and status quo turn dazzling white. Seeing the light of life and love just radiating at the top of this mountain. It would have certainly been hard to leave that place. Which might have been why Peter wanted to stay. We hear him say, let's build some dwellings. Let's pitch some tents here, and let's stay a while. I mean, what's the rush to get back down there? I know what's down there. We've been down there. It seems so much better up here. But much to his dismay, the next thing they know, the light show is over, God has spoken, the guests have disappeared, and all of them are back on their way down the mountain, back to the land of darkness and broken relationships and broken people. What could they do? What would they do? I mean, what do you do after you have a mountaintop experience? What do you do after you experience something so powerful, so wonderful, so mysterious and breathtaking that it could only occur at a place like the top of a mountain, or at a time and place that's as difficult to recreate as climbing to the top of a mountain? Maybe it's been on a vacation where you did climb the mountain and see the views from the top. Or maybe it was a youth gathering or a mission trip where you experienced nothing short of God with you. I mean, after that, do you look at creation differently now that you've seen its vastness from a new perspective? Do you worship differently after having been in the company of tens of thousands of other worshipers? We might for a short time, but it doesn't always seem to stick, does it? Kind of like the way we try and transform our own lives. New exercises, or new ways of eating, or new clothes, or new ways of handling relationships, or new ways of treating others. They all take a great amount of effort, and we often resort back to ways they always have been. That's even if we're willing to try and make those changes in the first place. This transfiguration stuff, it's hard. And it can be scary. I mean, let's look back at Peter on the mountain, the one who wanted to build those dwellings so they could stay. I always thought that it was so he could live in that moment forever, not have to come back down the mountain. But more recently, I heard a different take on it. And that take was maybe he didn't want to leave because he didn't want to be transfigured himself. After having seen Jesus be transfigured, being changed right in front of his eyes, he was probably thinking that he might be next. I mean, if his rabbi was being changed, what's to say that he didn't need to be changed himself? So maybe he wanted to bunker down and build a dwelling with such a foundation that it wouldn't be shaken, or pound more stakes into the ground so that tent didn't have a chance to blow away by any storms. I mean, did you see what happened to Jesus? I'm fine just as I am. That looked like it hurt. Transfiguration for Jesus meant being completely vulnerable, having all those outer layers stripped away until there was nothing left except this pure white appearance. God's voice declared exactly who that person was, and it turned the course for the remainder of his ministry. I mean, why would Peter want to go through that? Like I said, we all want those mountaintop experiences. We all want to be transformed into what God has made us to be. But we're pretty nervous about that transfiguration part of it that needs to take place for us to get there. We don't like being exposed and vulnerable. We don't like having those layers of who we are and those things that keep us comfortable stripped away. We, like Peter, would rather bunker down and stay where we are instead of going back down the mountain to face what is in store for us. What a fitting way to enter into Lent. I hope that this can serve as a reminder for us all that in these coming 40 days, that even through the fear and vulnerability and pain of stripping away those layers of who we are on the surface and stripping away those things that keep us comfortable, beneath all of that, we might find what God will show us and find who God created us to be through the light and the new life that exists within. Blessings on that journey. Amen.